In the stillness of May 17, 2014, the waters near the Courtney Campbell Causeway in Clearwater carried a terrible secret. When it surfaced, the discovery of 9-year-old Felicia Nicole Williams Sugarplum, to those who loved her, would shatter a community and spark one of Tampa Bay's most haunting criminal cases. How could a little girl so careful, so cherished, slip into the hands of danger through the very person her mother trusted? Felicia's story is not only one of loss, but of deception hidden in plain sight, of warning signs overlooked, and of systems that failed to protect her. Yet it is also a story of transformation, of a tragedy that compelled a community to act, of an investigation that gave voice to a child silenced too soon, and of the lessons that demand our attention today. Because what seems like ordinary trust between neighbors can sometimes conceal extraordinary danger. And the question her story leaves us with is one that lingers long after the headlines fade. Would we recognize the signs if it were our turn to protect a child? Felicia Nicole Williams was born on December 9, 2004 in Tampa, Florida, the fifth of 6 daughters to Felicia Demerson and Jerome Williams. She came into the world with a round, angelic face that earned her the nickname Sugar Plum, a name spoken with affection by everyone who loved her. Her life was full of love. Her mother, Felicia Demerson, carried the daily weight of raising 6 daughters, loving but often stretched thin. She leaned on young Felicia after undergoing foot surgery in 2013. With quiet maturity, Felicia stepped in to cook simple meals, keep the house in order, and sit by her mother's side with patience and care. Their bond was tender, built on trust, gratitude, and a closeness that only deepened over time. Where her mother's love was steady and close, guiding Felicia through the rhythms of everyday life, her father's presence was more uncertain. Jerome drifted in and out, his marriage clouded by conflict and absence. But one thing was never in doubt: he adored his daughter. His love showed itself in gestures that mattered deeply to her, like the bicycle he gave her, a gift she rode with joy and pride. Among her sisters, Felicia found her closest companion in Shakula Given. Shakula often described her little sister as pure joy, quick to laugh, gentle in spirit, and endlessly kind. The two shared secrets, teased each other, and stood together through the ups and downs of childhood. For Felicia, her sisters were not just family, but a circle of protectors and friends who filled her days with warmth. Her grandmother, Brenda Johnson, loved her just as deeply, treasuring her sugar plum as a bright spark in the family, a source of pride and delight. Together, they made up Felicia's world, a home filled with love. Even in the face of hardship, within that circle, one figure stood out as the person Felicia's mother trusted most: Ebony Alicia Y. At just 23, Ebony worked at the Whispering Oaks nursing home, but her influence reached far beyond her job. In time, she became woven into the rhythm of the Williams family's daily life. She and Ms. Demerson had first connected through church activities and neighborhood gatherings, their friendship deepening in the quiet solidarity of 2 young women facing life's struggles in a hard community. From that closeness grew a trust that felt unshakable. Ebony even called herself Felicia's godmother, not in any official sense, but as a title born of affection, familiarity, and the confidence her mother placed in her. To Felicia, Ebony was never just another adult on the sidelines. She was someone who praised her, listened to her endless stories, slipped her small gifts, and made her feel uniquely cherished. For a little girl who thrived on love and encouragement, Ebony's attention meant the world. And yet, as time would later reveal, the bond that seemed so full of light carried shadows too, shadows that would eventually draw Felicia into circumstances no child should ever have been forced to endure. But trust, once given, can sometimes open the door to danger. In the first weeks of May, Ebony's behavior began to shift in ways that, at the time, seemed small but now feel like alarms. At work, she sighed to coworkers that Felicia was too clingy, that the little girl got into everything when she stopped by the nursing home. One colleague remembered her saying she needed a break from babysitting. She never voiced those frustrations to Felicia's mother, who still saw Ebony as the friend she could lean on. More troubling was Ebony's sudden romantic involvement with Granville Ashante Ritchie, a 34-year-old Jamaican national she'd met just 3 days before. May 16th, phone records subpoenaed during the investigation showed Ebony had saved his number as hubby in her phone after knowing him less than 72 hours. Text messages recovered from her device revealed she'd been calling him her husband to friends, displaying an intense attachment that concerned those around her. This rapid emotional investment in a virtual stranger would prove to be a fatal judgment error. But the man who suddenly filled her world was not who he seemed. Behind Granville's charm lay years of violence, broken relationships, and patterns of preying on the vulnerable. He was still married, entangled with other women, and carried a past marked by abuse and predatory behavior. Yet to Ebony, he was new, exciting, and all-consuming. And so, without warning, he slipped into Felicia's orbit. No safeguards were in place, no red flags raised, no system strong enough to protect a child from the danger now standing at her doorstep. May 16, 2014 began like any other day until a single phone call set events in motion. At 4:00 p.m., Felicia picked up the family phone and asked her mother if she could go with Miss Ebony, trusting the woman she had welcomed into her family's life. Felicia's mother said yes. She could not have known those words would be the last she'd ever speak to her daughter. By 4:31 p.m., a checker security camera captured Felicia with Ebony and a man later identified as Granville Ritchie. The 9-year-old looked carefree, smiling as they ordered food. Yet one detail told a different story. Felicia was no longer wearing the clothes she had left home in. That unnoticed change meant they had already stopped at Granville's apartment in the Doral Oaks complex. It was the first quiet fracture in the illusion of safety. Just 35 minutes later, at 5:06 p.m., a brief 911 call went out from Granville's phone. It lasted only seconds, just faint background noise. What prosecutors would later argue was Felicia's voice. Before the line went dead, right after that by 5:30, Ebony claimed she stepped into the shower, and when she came out, Felicia was gone. In less than an hour, a child had slipped from ordinary safety into unthinkable danger. But Ebony didn't pick up the phone. She didn't call Felicia's mother. She didn't call 911. Instead, she borrowed Granville's car and drove aimlessly for 3 hours, while Felicia's trail grew colder with every passing minute. By the time she finally called Felicia's sister, Shakula, at 9:30 p.m., panic had already taken root. Shakula remembers the chill in her stomach as Ebony stammered through a trembling, confused story. Something was off, terribly off, and when their mother heard that, her careful, cautious daughter had simply disappeared. She was crushed by a guilt that would never leave her, the guilt of having trusted the wrong person. The family wasted no time. They called the police, their voices shaking with urgency, and within minutes officers began organizing a search. Patrol cars moved through East Tampa. Calls went out across the Doral Oaks complex. Flashlights swept through parking lots, wooded corners, and stairwells while officers knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen the 9-year-old girl. But the night stretched on with no sign of Felicia. The following account is painful and sensitive. I will share it carefully, because the truth matters not only to honor Felicia, but to prevent such tragedies from happening again. It was not until the morning of May 17, 2014 that the truth surfaced in the most devastating way. Near the Courtney Campbell Causeway in Clearwater, 2 people walking by the water noticed something strange drifting near the mangroves. At first it looked like debris caught against the rocks, but as they drew closer, their unease grew into horror. Floating in the still water was the body of a little girl. They froze in shock, then quickly dialed 911. Felicia had been found. Felicia's body was recovered from the water. She showed no signs of movement, her skin already cold, a silent confirmation that she had been gone for hours. The scene spoke not in words but in grief. A child's life ended far too soon, her final moments lost to the shadows. Police arrived quickly at the Courtney Campbell Causeway after the morning call on May 17, 2014. The shoreline was sealed off as investigators moved carefully along the rocks and mangroves, documenting and collecting what evidence they could. Felicia's body was recovered from the water and taken for examination. The following findings are sensitive. They are shared carefully, in respectful language, to honor Felicia and her family. The autopsy confirmed the victim's identity as 9-year-old Felicia Williams. Forensic doctors noted signs of repeated blows to the head and determined her death had come by strangulation. The terms were clinical, but their weight was devastating. Felicia's final moments had been violent, leaving a wound no family could bear. News of her death shattered the Williams household. When the sheriff's office delivered the confirmation, Shakula recalled the moment her mother collapsed in grief. "We knew then something terrible had happened," she later said. With the discovery confirmed, detectives turned immediately to the two adults last seen with Felicia, Ebony Alicia Y. and Granville Ashante Ritchie. From the very beginning, their accounts raised suspicion. Ebony's first statement to police claimed that she and a female friend named Vivian had picked Felicia up around 4:00 p.m. on May 16th. They had stopped at Checkers, then gone to an apartment. Ebony said she took a shower between 5:30 and 6:00, and when she emerged, Felicia was gone. She insisted that she borrowed a car to search for 3 hours, before finally calling Felicia's sister at 9:30 p.m. Yet under questioning, her story began to fray. Investigators pressed her on Vivian, and she admitted the woman did not exist. Vivian was in fact Granville, the man she had introduced into Felicia's life only days earlier. She then changed her story again, saying Granville had sent her out to buy marijuana. When she returned, she found him shirtless, sweating, and claiming that Felicia had been sent to CVS for candy. Detectives reviewed every camera at every CVS nearby. None showed Felicia. In her interviews, Ebony was nervous, restless, and inconsistent. She spoke quickly, contradicted herself, and avoided eye contact when Granville's name came up. Detectives recognized the signs: panic, guilt, and perhaps fear. To them, it was clear that she had chosen to protect Granville rather than the little girl entrusted to her. Granville, by contrast, appeared calm, almost cold. He told police that he and Ebony had taken Felicia to his apartment, where she watched a movie while the two of them went into the bedroom. After about 45 minutes, he said, they came out to find her gone. The door left unlocked. He claimed Ebony borrowed his car to search. Then he dropped her off and went to visit a friend. Later, he said, he drove to St. Petersburg to see another girlfriend, but when asked for names, addresses, or details, he had none. His answers were vague, his tone flat, his memory conveniently cloudy. Most damning of all, he never mentioned stopping at the Courtney Campbell Causeway, the very location where Felicia was later found, though GPS records would prove his car had been there that night. Taken together, their accounts were riddled with contradictions. Ebony shifted from one version to another, each less believable than the last, while Granville's indifference and vague denials only deepened suspicion. One stammered and avoided the truth, the other controlled his story with practiced calm. Both pointed investigators toward the same conclusion: Felicia had not simply disappeared. Something much darker had unfolded in apartment 2502. For detectives, the inconsistencies were not just frustrating, they were costly. Ebony's lies and her 5-hour delay in reporting Felicia missing had already prevented an Amber Alert from being issued in time. Every false lead, every invented name, had wasted precious hours, and for Felicia's grieving family, those hours could never be returned. As detectives pressed harder, the stories began to unravel. Ebony, whose words had already shifted several times, finally admitted that Vivian never existed. The mysterious friend was in fact Granville, the man she had been calling her husband after only days of knowing him. Under pressure, she also confessed that she and Granville had concocted the tale of Felicia vanishing while she was in the shower. Even more damning, she revealed that Granville's own mother, Gloria Gibson, had joined them in a late-night 3-way phone call to coordinate a false story for the police. Granville, identified by investigators as Trevor on May 18th, admitted to picking Felicia up that afternoon, but insisted the little girl had simply wandered off. His account quickly fell apart. He claimed he spent the evening visiting a friend and then drove to St. Petersburg to see his girlfriend, Calissa Kelly. But when detectives pressed him for names, addresses, or any detail that might prove his alibi, his answers grew vague, inconsistent, and evasive. Physical evidence told a different story. GPS data from Granville's silver Lexus showed the car traveling on the night of May 16th to the very spot where Felicia's body would later be discovered. The car lingered there for nearly half an hour before moving on. When police searched the vehicle, they found traces that could not be explained away. A mangrove leaf caught in the headlight that matched the vegetation of the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Sand in the floor mats and trunk, identical in composition to sand from the same shoreline. At Granville's apartment, investigators uncovered more unsettling details. Drag marks on the carpet matched the wheels of luggage. A broken zipper pull lay hidden beneath the couch, and two matching suitcases were found, one in the trunk of his car, one inside the unit. Together, they painted a picture of an attempt to hide what had happened inside. The apartment itself had been scrubbed clean, no DNA, no clear signs of struggle, just an eerie emptiness that suggested deliberate erasure. And there was a 911 call. At 5:06 p.m. on May 16th, a short, fragmented call had been placed from Granville's phone. Only faint background noise could be heard before the line went dead. Prosecutors later argued it was Felicia herself, making a desperate attempt to call for help. Police had been dispatched to Doral Oaks in response, but with no precise apartment number and no functional security cameras on the property, they left without finding her. The psychological portraits that emerged from the interrogations could not have been more different. Granville remained calm, almost detached, offering vague timelines and hollow denials. He didn't fight the evidence head-on, only shrugged away responsibility, as if trying to stay one step removed. Ebony, in contrast, grew increasingly frantic. Her testimony bent and broke under pressure, shifting from lie to half-truth as guilt and fear overtook her. She admitted she had followed Granville's lead, protecting him even as her conscience buckled. For Felicia's family, each revelation cut deeper. They were devastated to learn Ebony had waited until 9:30 p.m. to call for help. Felicia's mother collapsed under the weight of betrayal, tormented by the knowledge that she had trusted the wrong person. Shakula, her sister, later said she could never forgive Ebony for abandoning her role as guardian when Felicia needed her most. The case made one thing clear: the truth was not in the words of Ebony or Granville, but in the evidence leaves, sand, GPS signals, broken zippers, and the faint echo of a child's 911 call. These pieces built a story of calculation and concealment on Granville's part, and of weakness and manipulation on Ebony's. By May 18, 2014, investigators had gathered enough evidence to make arrests. Ebony Y was charged first with lying to police, a low-level offense that allowed her release on bail within hours. The leniency drew sharp criticism from advocates who believed her lies had cost Felicia precious time. Days later, Granville Ritchie, identified as Trevor, was arrested for first-degree murder and child abuse. From the start, he denied responsibility, insisting Felicia had simply walked out, though GPS records, forensic evidence, and witness testimony painted a very different picture. The case took years to reach trial, delayed by legal battles and changes in Florida's death penalty statute. When proceedings finally began in September 2019, the courtroom was packed with Felicia's family, many wearing purple ribbons for the little girl they had lost. Prosecutors opened with the chilling 911 call, just seconds long. Filled with muffled noise, prosecutors argued was Felicia herself trying to summon help. They laid out the timeline of her final day, each step marked by betrayal and missed chances. Over 8 days, jurors heard from 37 witnesses. The medical examiner described the blunt force injuries and strangulation that ended Felicia's life, noting defensive wounds that showed she had fought back. A digital forensics expert traced Granville's Lexus to the Courtney Campbell Causeway, lingering there for 23 minutes, the same shoreline where Felicia was found. A teenage girl testified from behind a screen about her own encounters with Granville, establishing his pattern of preying on minors. Physical evidence sealed the case: mangrove leaves in his headlight, sand in his car mats, and a broken suitcase zipper that matched luggage in his trunk. The defense tried to cast doubt, pointing to Ebony's shifting stories and drug use, suggesting she bore equal responsibility. They questioned the reliability of GPS data and argued that Granville's low IQ made premeditation unlikely, but their arguments faltered under cross-examination, and Granville himself chose not to testify. On September 24, 2019, the jury deliberated for just 3 hours before finding him guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and sexual battery. Felicia's mother wept silently in court. Granville showed no emotion in the penalty phase. The family spoke of birthdays that would never come, of Felicia's empty bedroom, of the bicycle that now sat unused. Her sister Shakula's words cut deepest. You threw her away like garbage, but she was everything to us. The jury returned with a unanimous recommendation for death. Judge Michelle Sisko upheld the verdict, calling the murder especially heinous, cruel, and calculated. In 2020, Granville Ritchie was formally sentenced to death and transferred to Florida State Prison's death row, where he remains today. Ebony's case ended with far lighter consequences. She pled guilty in 2020 to lying to police, apologized to Felicia's family in court, and was sentenced to 75 days in jail and 5 years of probation. For Felicia's loved ones, it was a bitter reminder of how misplaced trust and systemic failures had converged to take a child's life. As of 2024, Granville Ritchie remains on death row at Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida, where he spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. His appeals continue through the federal system, with his attorneys raising claims of ineffective counsel, improper jury instructions, and constitutional violations. Each appeal brings fresh pain to Felicia's family, who must relive the tragedy while fighting to maintain the justice they feel was served. Ebony Y completed her jail sentence but remains on probation until 2025. She has been required to attend counseling, perform community service, and has been prohibited from being alone with minor children. Her presence in the Tampa Bay area continues to anger many who feel she escaped true accountability for her role in Felicia's death. Some community members have reported seeing her at local stores and describing the uncomfortable encounters that follow. The financial impact on Felicia's family has been substantial. Beyond the immeasurable emotional loss, they've faced costs for funeral expenses, counseling, and time away from work for court proceedings. A GoFundMe campaign raised some money, but the long-term financial strain of losing a family member to violent crime, a reality rarely discussed, continues to affect them. They've also dealt with the secondary trauma of having their daughter's case become public, seeing her photo in media reports, and reading comments from strangers on social media. The investigation and trial laid bare a series of systemic failures that had allowed Felicia's murder to happen. Despite his long record of violence and abuse, Granville Ritchie was able to come into contact with the child through nothing more formal than a neighbor's trust. There were no background checks, no safeguards, just faith placed in the wrong person. When Felicia's 911 call went unanswered, when security cameras at Doral Oaks had been broken for months, when databases failed to flag Granville's history across jurisdictions, each lapse became another link in the chain that left a child unprotected. In the years that followed, changes began to take shape. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office revised its 911 procedures, making sure that even brief or disconnected calls would be followed up with enhanced GPS trackings and mandatory checks at addresses tied to criminal histories. Deputies also received new training on recognizing early signs of child endangerment during routine calls. Community advocates rallied behind what they called Felicia's Law, a proposal to require background checks for any adult entrusted with temporary custody of a child, even in informal babysitting situations. While a statewide law has yet to pass, several Florida counties have since launched voluntary programs that allow parents to verify caregivers before leaving their children in their care. Other reforms reached even further. Florida created a real-time database to improve how law enforcement agencies share information about sex offenders and violent criminals, closing the gaps that had once allowed Granville to slip through unnoticed. Schools and community centers across Tampa Bay expanded their programs on grooming awareness and child abuse prevention, determined to give children the tools to speak up and adults the training to recognize the warning signs. Felicia's story ended in tragedy, but it forced change. Her name became not only a memory, but a call to action, a reminder that protecting children requires vigilance, accountability, and a community willing to listen when even the faintest cry for help is heard. Felicia's death devastated East Tampa, but it also galvanized the community. In meetings after the trial, parents admitted they had ignored warning signs in the past, believing it wasn't their place to intervene. That silence gave way to action. A group of mothers created Sugar Plum's Legacy, offering free babysitter background checks, a neighborhood child safety watch, and safe spaces through local churches. They set up buddy systems for school children, efforts credited with preventing several potential incidents. The tragedy also reshaped child protection in Hillsborough County. Social workers were trained to spot grooming behaviors. New rules were adopted for non-family caregivers, and an anonymous child safety tip line logged hundreds of calls in its first year. Schools added age-appropriate lessons on body safety and speaking up, teaching children that secrets about adults should never be kept and that asking for help is an act of bravery. Felicia's story became more than a loss. It became a legacy that continues to safeguard other children. Felicia Nicole Williams should be 19 years old today. She should be preparing for college, still telling the knock-knock jokes that made everyone laugh, maybe teaching younger children the cheers she once performed with such joy. Instead, her name lives on as both a cautionary tale and a catalyst for change, a reminder that protecting children requires more than love and good intentions. It demands vigilance, working systems, and communities unwilling to stay silent when children are at risk. The investigation that exposed her killer revealed both the strengths and the shortcomings of justice. Forensic science, digital evidence, and relentless police work proved what had happened, but no verdict could bring her back. The trial brought accountability, but it could not erase the grief. Yet from this pain, reforms emerged, and Felicia's story continues to shape protections for children who might otherwise have slipped through the cracks. Her mother, Felicia Demerson, now speaks at schools and community centers, turning her loss into purpose. "I tell parents to ask questions," she says. "Ask who's going to be around your children. Ask for references. Ask for background checks. Don't worry about offending someone, worry about protecting your babies." In her wallet, she carries not the school photo that filled the news, but one of Felicia laughing at the park, feeding ducks, vibrant and alive. That is how she wants the world to remember her sugar plum. The failures that allowed this tragedy, from a dropped 911 call to the absence of background checks, remind us that child safety is not the job of one agency or one parent alone. It is a shared duty. Every neighbor, every teacher, every official, every bystander has a role. When one link in that chain breaks, children are left vulnerable. Felicia's story makes clear that the signs of danger are rarely invisible. Behavioral changes, sudden secretive relationships, criminal histories in plain sight. These are not subtle hints, but warnings begging for attention. Being overly cautious is always better than being too late. Trust your instincts. Verify before you trust. Speaking up is not paranoia, it is protection. To honor Felicia is to act. Be the voice for children who cannot speak for themselves. Share her story, not for shock, but for education, so that every parent learns the right questions, every neighbor knows the warning signs, and every community refuses to turn away. Your vigilance today could save a life tomorrow. In memory of Felicia Nicole Williams, Sugar Plum, may her legacy ensure that no other child suffers in silence while adults look away.